Hello, welcome. Welcome. I'd like to welcome Bart Bemus to this little interview that we'll do for my students and for, well, whoever else might be interested. Thanks so much for giving us your time today.
Sure.
Can we start? I like to start all the way back at the beginning. Will you tell us about where you grew up and how you kind of got into art and a little bit of that path?
Okay, sure. Yeah, I grew up in Troy, Ohio, which is about 25,000 people north of Dayton, Ohio. Um, so kind of a small town, I guess. Grew up there, started art for as long as I can remember. My dad was actually drawing when I was a little kid. And I have drawings he did of me, like wearing diapers, drawing on the floor and doing that. So I don't remember a time where I started. I always did it, which I think most kids draw, right?
Oh,
So
yeah.
so I did it, and like I said, my dad did drawings, so I was always encouraged to draw. I had a couple artists in the extended family, so it was never a weird thing in the family to want to be an artist. So I was always encouraged to do it. It was something I was a little bit better than some of the other kids when I was young. So I got a little attention for doing it and enjoyed doing it. So I just kept doing it. And then in high school, I had, well, actually before that, I, I when I was in junior high, I had a teacher that talked my parents into getting me private art lessons because she thought that I was doing pretty good. So I started getting private art lessons when I was about 13, maybe 12, 13, and started painting then. So I started with acrylic paintings on canvas when I was 12 or 13 or
Okay.
so. Um, and and then when I got to high school, my high school teacher actually called my parents in and said, this guy should probably go into this for a living. Um, so with him and with my parents, I was encouraged to do it. So um, I do have a painting right here. I actually just grabbed it from my mom's house not too long ago. I don't know if you can see this at all.
Oh, wow.
This
Wow.
is this is a painting I did when I was 14. So,
Oh, my goodness. That's
so,
awesome.
so yeah. So I went to Columbus College of Art and Design and studied illustration there. So it was a four-year plus a little bit actually school, and I ended up with a Bachelor of Fine Arts after that.
Okay.
So this was in I graduated high school in 1980, graduated college 1984. So it was a very different world for being an art illustrator, especially at that time.
Oh,
It was
yeah.
kind of a transition time. Well, before that, you could go work in a studio. You could have a full-time job in a studio, which is what I thought I was going to be doing when I was studying in Chicago or in Columbus, Ohio. And then I went up to Chicago and got a job actually in a studio. There were only a couple studios left it was 1985 by the time I went up to Chicago. So I got some work in the studio, realized pretty quickly that they were dinosaurs, that wasn't what was happening. So I went out freelance on my own within about a year and a half. I worked in the studios for about a year and a half, and to be honest with you, I didn't learn much in the studios. The people that were there, the only few that were very good weren't that interested in teaching.
Oh,
So
yeah.
so I just didn't learn that much. I think they were struggling probably to try and keep. They were busy trying to keep the studio afloat, and trying to keep it alive.
Was it kind of on its way out because people were moving towards freelance, or because they were just working a new style of making the work? Or
I think just because there had been so much more illustration that was being bought back in the 70s and the 80s. And I came in at the tail end of that doing finished illustration, so I started doing my freelance then, and I was doing oil paintings at that time as freelance illustration. This is long before digital. So it was probably
yeah.
about 1987 that I started doing these oil paintings. And I had a lot of success right away. I do have also just a tear sheet from one of my early oil paintings. This
Oh,
was
wow.
that was for Corona beer, and that was printed in Rolling Stone and then Sports Illustrated and
Oh,
uh,
wow.
other places. So I did a lot of Corona stuff at first, and I was just lucky enough to do pretty good at it right away.
When you would do a piece like that, you would create a finished oil painting, and then would they come back and say, we want you to tweak this, or would you go through like a?
They would do that, yeah. So I'd have to go back and paint over areas, and then when I was done, then they had to take the finished painting, put it up on a board, and photograph it with a high resolution camera. Or it became easier for them later. I used to actually do my oil paintings on paper, and then take tape to a board, and then they would peel the paper off, put it on a drum that would roll, and they would scan it that way. And that was like the version of an early scanner,
Oh,
was
wow.
to do it that way. So it was a little different in those times. So
Did
about
you?
no,
I
go ahead.
was I was just gonna ask, did you keep any of those original paintings, or did they all get like painted over?
I've got a few here and there, but most of them are all. And in fact, at that time, at least, the clients kept the originals most of the time.
Oh,
So
yeah.
so they were buying it, and it was for I right from the beginning geared toward doing advertising, because I ended up doing book covers later. That I would get for the exact same painting, I would get paid 4 or 5 times the amount uh, doing an advertisement than I would doing a book cover.
Oh,
So
wow.
so I geared toward trying to do advertising. Uh, and unfortunately, I thought I'd be doing that my whole career, to tell you the truth, which is really what I wanted to do, was do oil paintings and sell them that way. But the just the fashion of the industry changed, and especially for advertising, they quit using the finished illustrations. There was a long period where there were almost no illustrations for advertising.
I was gonna ask, did they move to photography more? Is that what it was, or?
Yeah, they went to photography, and it was a lot cheaper to go with photography, and it was faster. A painting like either like the one I just showed you, it might take me like a week to do that painting. So excuse me. Um,
I,
so in the about 1990s, in the early 1990s, that market started to fade, and I started to look for something else. I had moved to Seattle actually in between, so I was living in Seattle, but I was getting almost all my new work out of New York City. So and that, once again, that was before email or anything, so it was all done over the phone and then mailing stuff back and forth. So I
oh,
would mail. I'd have to do a painting, an oil painting, and it would still be wet, and I'd have to package it up and then send it to New York, hoping it would be not get smeared and be dry by the time it got there.
that's unreal. Wow. I
So
want
so
Go
that
ahead.
changed. That changed, and I had an opportunity to go back to Chicago and start doing storyboards, draw storyboards, uh, working in house. Even though I was freelance, I worked in house in an ad agency, which was one of the biggest ones in the world at the time. It was DDB Chicago, and it was one of the biggest ones in the world. So I ended up drawing storyboards and then doing, they're called comps for print ads, which I would just draw a mock-up of a print ad and do those. But I ended up doing, I think I added up one time for individual frames that I would draw for storyboards. I did over 25,000 of them, 25,000 drawings. So I was busy doing that for a long time.
And were those for commercials or like television shows, or just kind of everything, or?
I did one TV show later on, but it was all commercials. It was and there were it was Budweiser frogs. I was the first person to draw stuff for Budweiser frogs, and
Okay.
those the What's Up guys that were the Bud Light What's Up guys.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
did a lot of stuff for McDonald's. It was all clients of that scale that I was working on.
And
So
when you would do that, was that pencil to paper, and you were just drawing kind of small frames, or?
it was pencil and paper. They were like 5 inches by 7 inches, usually somewhere around there. And then I would ink over top of them, and occasionally in color. Then you would go with a third layer and add color with markers, um, which was really stinky. If you got like several guys in a room using color markers all day long,
Oh, yeah.
it was pretty toxic.
Yeah.
But it was really good money. So I did that, and I was lucky enough to be doing that uh, for a long time, and So, and had a wife that was smart enough to start putting away money, thinking this isn't going to last forever. So, and that work started to fade once again, started to fade away not that long ago, probably about well, it's probably started about 10 years ago, but the last three years maybe it's really petered out to where just not doing that much of it at all now right now. So kind of semi-retired, and then with COVID, especially not getting much work at all. So I started the up doing my own project, the national parks, doing artwork for the national parks, which is how you found me.
Yeah.
So just it's able to live on what we have and not going to get any other work anyway. So I'm going to just start doing what I want to do and see if I can start selling that more.
How long have you been doing that now?
The national parks,
Yeah.
just since about Christmas this last year.
Oh
So,
wow.
so 4 or 5 months, I guess.
That's crazy. Because I feel like I mean, it seems like you gained a pretty good following fairly quickly. I mean, I think part of that's because your work is just wonderful. You know, like it's really a top tier. But that's cool.
Yeah, so I hope if I could make a decent living doing that, that would I'd love to be able to do that. Just make stuff that I like to make, and it's a style that I just love doing, and it really keeps referring back to some of the very first stuff I did as a kid. First magazine cover I ever did was when I was 19 years old, and it was scratch board, just like what I'm doing here. So it's a style I've keep coming back to for stuff that I want to do. Keep doing that scratch board style. So now being it, I worked for so long doing the storyboards and everything that I got really, really good at Photoshop. And so I'm able to bring the digital part into the scratch board part of it. So the color work I do is all in Photoshop now.
But that was going to be my next question was when did you start to incorporate the computer into your work? And I guess kind of like how much, what percentage would you say? Do you do most of it now digitally or is it?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say 95% of what I do is digital now. But I base it, I mean, it feels, when I'm working on a piece, like a scratchboard looking piece, when I work on it in Photoshop, uh, I forget that it's Photoshop. I do it just like I'm doing a scratchboard piece. Um, I mean, it feels exactly the same. In fact, I do it the same way. Um, I draw black lines, with a pen, and then I paint in big black areas and scratch back out of it with using a pen, but a digital pen. But I scratch back out of it with uh, into the black areas to make negative areas and
Oh, that's
make
interesting.
white
I was
lines.
gonna one of the pieces that we'll look at in a little bit. I was gonna ask you about that. So that's and I think I'll probably have students that will be curious. Will you tell me about your equipment? Like, do you draw on like a Wacom tablet or what are your preferred tools? I guess.
I have I guess it's a 27-inch Cintiq, a big Cintiq, so I draw directly on the screen. But it's a Wacom Cintiq, pressure sensitive, and uh, so it's a nice piece of equipment. It makes all the difference, I think,
Well,
between.
that's what I wondered about because some artists struggle with drawing on a tablet, but looking at the screen, and
It makes me
but
nauseated if I try and do that. I've gone in the shops before they had that set up, and I just couldn't do it. Makes me sick, and literally it makes me sick in the stomach trying to match up what I'm doing down here with what I see up there.
yeah,
So,
that's
I just work directly on the screen with a Cintiq.
yeah.
It took a little while to get used to working on glass all the time because I'd worked on paper and canvas for so long. But once I got used to it, I'm more comfortable doing that than anything now.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Do you still do any of the traditional, do you still do any oil painting or?
I haven't done oil paintings much for a while, but I did oil paintings up until about 5 years ago. I had a couple shows in Chicago. I did landscape paintings in oil. So I was doing that. And I would go outside. I enjoyed going outside and painting outside quite a bit too.
And
Uh,
when you would do that, do you have a scale that you like to work at, or
for
you're pretty comfortable with whatever?
for with oil paintings, I'd like to work pretty big. Up to maybe probably the biggest piece I've done lately is like 3 by 5 feet, something like that, maybe in oils. But
Yeah.
but then, I still do some pen and ink and do scratchboard for fun.
I'm going to get into a couple of the questions that my students had. Um, let's see.
So who are your students? Who are what's the school?
So I teach at a school. It's called IC Imagine. We're in Asheville, North Carolina.
Okay.
And I teach mostly 6th through 8th graders, but I have some seniors that come in for it's essentially an independent study. They kind of push into my room.
Okay.
They're kind of at a place where they're kind of making their own thing, and I just kind of give a little bit of input, steer a little bit, but yeah.
Great.
So I want to get into, they had some questions. So they wondered about, like, how did you come to choose national parks, and if you have any favorite national parks?
Well, that's a good question. I think I chose the national parks, A, because I love them, and B, because a lot of other people love them. I wanted to make artwork that was going to connect with people. And if you just make random landscapes, it's a little harder to connect with people than I wanted to. It's better to make it about places they've been before than they have some sort of experience maybe they can relate to, which was, I guess, why I chose the national parks. And also to bring awareness to the national parks themselves. In the future, I'd like to, if I can make this financially successful, then I'd like to maybe start some programs to help some of the especially access, I guess, some of the access programs people have to make sure that the natural lands, that the public natural lands stay public so people have access and you don't get some sort of government shenanigans that take it away from people.
Yeah.
I think that's really important, that there always has to be activists that try and protect those lands, because there's always going to be people who try and take it away. So I would try and do more to support that in the future. Right now, I'm just trying to make some artwork and create a little bit of a following, that and get a group of people that care about national parks.
Yeah. And do you have a favorite?
I think my favorite would probably be Zion. Well, Yosemite is there. Zion is there, I guess. I've been to Zion more lately than I have in Yosemite, but I've only been to Yosemite one time, and I had a really great experience. It was back when I used to rock climb a lot, and my buddy that I climbed with a lot, we hired another guy that we knew, but he was a professional guide, and the three of us did climbed El Capitan.
Oh, wow.
So that was a phenomenal experience to be there and do that.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
This was a question, and I don't know, with being digital work, the question was, how quickly do you go through pens?
Go through what?
Pens.
Oh, pens. Well, yeah, a lot of it's digital, but when I was drawing storyboards, I would go through probably 3-4 pens a day at that.
Oh, wow.
That time. I was wearing them out pretty quickly, but probably it'll last me a couple months, I guess, now.
Yeah.
Something like that. I don't use them as much. I'm doing a lot digitally. But,
do you have a preferred pen?
yeah, I like the what are they called? The microns.
Yep. Yeah,
microns are great.
Yep. And then another student asked, do you ever use pointillism?
I have done pointillism pieces before. I don't have the patience for that, and I also really like the flow of the lines you can get with lines through the piece. If you really look at the national parks pieces, as I'm laying out, I call it a map. I make a map of how the flow goes through the piece, at least for the bigger pieces, and those lines kind of follow a certain flow through the whole thing, and that helps with the energy, I think, of the piece quite a bit.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you about that, because it seems like the direction of your line work is very important to kind of what you end up with as kind of your finished piece.
Right.
Yeah.
Sometimes, a lot of times you can't go too much against the description of the shape. If you're especially if you're trying to do like a face. I just did a piece of John Muir recently. It's like you can't. couldn't easily make like just a swirl shape across his face because it would kind of confuse the direction of the planes of his face.
Yes.
But there are other times where if I'm doing a rock or something like that, then I can kind of change the direction a little bit, and
Or
it
even like
becomes a
your
lot.
skies, I feel like I've noticed there's
Yeah, in the skies especially. So trying to get that in there.
um length of time on a piece, just kind of a rough estimate. What would you say?
One of the big pieces I do is usually about 2 to 2.5 days of work. So, and that's light days. I've been doing lighter days, so it's probably 15 to 18 hours, maybe something like that on the big pieces. And then on some of the small black and white pieces you see, those are probably like 5 to 8 hours. I do those on.
And are you able to, this is just my curiosity as an artist, do you generally kind of dig yourself in and do that work, or do you have to kind of break it up? Like you can do maybe an hour or two of kind of intense focus and then you got to step away for a little bit, or?
I'd like to sit down and crank out like 8 or 10 hours, but it just seems like I just don't do that much. Right? At least lately, I haven't been doing it that much. Something about doing these national parks pieces, it's a lot easier for me to pick away at them because I don't know why that is. Usually, it's hard for me to get into that focus or into the mindset of what I'm trying to do, but maybe it's more natural for me anyway. So to do these pieces, so I'm been a lot better about sitting down and just doing. If I have 2 hours, I can sit down and work on them for 2 hours, and then that's why I don't really know how long it takes me to do some of these pieces because I kind of pick away at them. I might only do them. It might only take me 15 hours to do it, but I might spend 3 days doing it or something like that.
Yeah. Do you think maybe that comes from the notion that this is more self-directed, like you're able to kind of?
Yeah, I think so. I almost, before I started doing this, most of the stuff I'd worked on, I was trying to please an art director. And that's part of the reason of wanting to do this to begin with, and why it's so much more fun for me is I'm finally the art director, so I can make it how I want it to be. So.
Was there any part, this is kind of just for my students that might consider choosing that path where they would potentially work for an art director, were there things about that that you liked or that you appreciated? Like I know sometimes I like for somebody to say, draw this, just that kind of that challenge. Were there any aspects of that that you were like, that I appreciated or that I enjoyed maybe?
Well, to be honest with you, probably the part I liked the best about it was that it was already pre-sold. I knew it was commissioned. I knew what I was going to make for doing the piece, and I was doing it. That's how I've made my living my entire career, is by doing artwork.
Yeah.
So it was making a living. Um, but also every once in a while I would get an art director. I worked with a lot of art directors for a really long time. I've worked with some of the same people for 12 years probably, doing projects for them. So I get to know them really well, and some of them are really good. They have a really good sense. So I've definitely done a lot of pieces that were better to have a second set of eyes on them and try and decide. And you're always, to do commercial illustration where you're doing it for an art director, you're always trying to sell something. So they have a sense, much better sense than I do, that they're dealing with it all the time of what they're trying to show, what they're trying to emphasize, what's the best way, and who their customers are. And I don't know that stuff as much anywhere like they do.
Yeah.
So you kind of respect their opinion of how to please their customers, that they know that better than I do. So
I find that really interesting too. I've heard before that the writers, authors of books, that their relationship with their editor is very similar. Just that it's generally not just the author's like pure work. Like it's kind of been whittled down and shaped with a partnership of sorts.
yeah, well, with the national parks, I'm pretty new to doing this on Instagram, um, but I'm starting to get a few people whose opinion I really respect, and we'll get a little bit of feedback back and forth on what they like or don't like about a piece. So, that helps a lot too. To have any kind of feedback from somebody I respect, especially somebody like that I don't have to take their opinion if I don't want
Yeah.
to.
Yeah. Yeah.
If they suggest a change and I don't want to do it, then I just don't do it.
Yeah. Cool. Is there anything that you dislike about the art that you make? If so, what?
The stuff that I'm doing now, or
Yeah, I
um,
think that's what the students were wondering about.
the national parks. You
Yeah.
know, no, there's nothing I dislike about doing the artwork at all. Um, it's you know, it's I'm putting it out kind of into a void right now. So whether it's going to work as a business or not, I'm so used to like doing commission work, you know, where I know how much money it's going to make me, and that it's going to make me money. And these they're starting to sell as posters go, but you know, don't know yet. So just got to keep plugging away with some faith, you know,
Yeah.
that's going to do it. And tell you the truth, even if it doesn't work, I'll probably just keep doing it anyway because I really enjoy doing it. So I enjoy doing this more than anything I've done for a long time, or it was.
Do you ever have people reach out to you about, like, even though it's digital, I could see someone like myself doing it, reach out to you about original pieces or ask you if there are originals that they can purchase, or not
I
so much?
haven't yet
No?
about these, but no, it's like most of the stuff. There's not a whole lot that I have originals for.
Yeah.
It's the prints, and I, you know, that's a downside to it, I guess. But when it comes to actually making prints and that sort of thing, it's so much easier digitally than trying to have a painting that you're trying to get made into a print, I guess.
Yeah. And then as an artist, what is the best piece of advice that you've been given?
I I, I think if someone's looking to do it for a living in the future, um, is just be as flexible, try and get as solid of a grounding as possible as far as aesthetic training goes, because the aesthetics don't change that much. It's like what looked good 20 years ago, you know, you might make it different, the styles might be different, but the reasons for doing it are going to be pretty similar because the aesthetic foundations are pretty consistent. So I would say get a good training in doing that, however you do it. There's a lot of different ways you can do it now. And then the other one would be to try and stay really flexible in your mindset, because things are changing really quickly and are going to obviously just seem like they're going to keep changing for a long time. And art is also a fashion, so it's always going to change. So try and stay nimble and change. You know, even if you hit on something that people like a lot, it's not going to last that long.
Well, I think that's, like you were saying, like you well, described to us your path, your career path, and just how it, like, you may have thought you had something going, and then that just kind of faded out, and now you had to, pivot this way, and that's
Yeah,
so interesting.
I was 21 years old. I thought I was going to be making paintings, you know, oil paintings for advertising for the rest of my life. You know, that was my whole plan, and that didn't last more than 10 years. You know.
Yeah, yeah. Is it all right if we share the screen? We can look at some of your pieces and talk about a little bit of the process.
Sure, you bet. Now,
All
do
right.
you want to see any of the advertising work at all too, or
Oh, yeah, I'd love to. You want to do that first?
up to you? Your
Okay.
show.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Yeah, let's look at some of your advertising. That'd be great.
Okay, if you go to it's Bang Up Studio is my business name, so it's BANG hyphen UP
Okay.
STUDIO.
All right. Let's see.
Yep, just a hyphen between the bang and the up.
Oh, okay.
Studio.com. You can just the front's just kind of an introduction page. You can go to portfolio.
Oh, wow. I was only looking at your the work on your Instagram and your Etsy, and is there a piece in here that you would you guide me, if you will?
Well, you know what? You might like seeing the album cover I just did. It's right in that national park style, which is right there where you are. The album cover for Robert John and the Wreck.
Oh, okay.
Uh,
Oh, wow. Well, that's great.
I did it as a wraparound too, so it's twice that wide, but the back cover wraps around.
So this is a digital piece, yes?
Yeah, that's digital. Yeah.
And you start, I think you said you start black and white?
In fact, if you scroll down, I think you see the entire.
Oh, I see. Yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah. What was your question? I'm sorry.
Do you start for this piece? Like, did you start with it black and white? Uh,
I did kind of a rough color sketch for these guys. They had a pretty good idea of what they wanted to do. So, and we didn't have much time. So I knocked this out in probably about 12 hours over just a little more than a day.
oh, wow. Did they reach out to you or?
They did, yeah. They'd seen my work on Instagram, reached out to me. They were great guys to work with.
That's
Super
awesome.
guys. Good music too. If you're not familiar with them, check them out.
Yeah. So, do you this is a question about kind of how
Oh,
you
I know
go
what you
about.
were talking about with the black and white. Yeah, I did do this piece with the black and white line work, and then essentially, I did this all digital, but it did look like a scratch board, a
Okay.
black and white scratch board, and then I did color for it.
When you do a piece like this, do you have a reference images that you work from, or several reference images, or?
Yeah, quite a bit. I'm coming from a illustration background, so I gather a lot of reference, very reference heavy, and it's all, it's about trying to make it as easy as possible to do a
Yeah.
piece of art. So whatever makes it that possible. So yeah, I do a lot of reference work.
I talk about that a lot with my students, how I just always, I feel like it's very important to have kind of some good reference images to create. I'm uh, just curious now. I'm looking.
So yeah, if you scroll right to the one you're on there, these are just comps for bus posters here.
Okay.
But this is a lot of the work I've done is these are just kind of photo bashed where I've picked together. This probably is um, maybe 20 different photos that I've bashed together and then painted over top of to paint in missing pieces and get the mood right.
Oh, wow.
So it's kind of a montage that's been reworked, which is what a lot of concept people do for games and films, work in the same way.
Was this influenced by your storyboard work, like this sort of?
Yeah, this is a direct offshoot. Most of the storyboard work I did for years was hand drawing. I would draw them in pencil and then ink it and then do it in marker. But then when everybody started using digital, I had to really ramp up being able to get good at digital pretty quickly,
Did
and
did
pretty
you
much
take? Oh, I'm sorry.
just
Go ahead.
and pretty much for because I still do some storyboard work and other advertising work, and so I had to it's almost all digital that I do now for that.
Um, yeah, they just look so cinematic. Like you can tell that it's kind of coming from that. In my mind, it seems like it's coming from that perspective.
Yeah, this is one of the art directors I was talking about that I've worked with for years, and that's what he was looking for, was something that looked like a movie,
Yeah.
like a movie poster, I guess.
And then I was curious, your as far as the digital, are you self-taught or did you take lessons somewhere or?
YouTube, I learned it
Oh
all
yeah.
on YouTube. Yeah, but it's like I already knew how to paint, I already knew how to draw,
Yeah.
and uh, and so I'm just using this as one more tool on top of all that.
I love that, to be able to talk about that with my students, as far as, it's all there. It's at your fingertips if you want to, stretch out a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know that there's any. It's not like the computer does it for you. You still got to do the artwork.
Yeah.
Uh, it's just another kind of tool to do artwork with. I think anyway, in my opinion. And I think when people run into trouble is when they try and get it to do the artwork for them, and that doesn't really work. So
Yeah. I'm pulling this piece up just because I feel like it has some of that directional line that you were talking about earlier.
yeah, in fact, that piece before I posted it, I didn't notice it because it was small, but that one still has my map in there. I hadn't erased that out yet. You can
That's
see.
the blue line work.
the faint blue line. That's the only one that still has that. But that's how I decided where my where the lines directions, the bulk of the lines go, and I did that to control the energy of the piece.
Yeah, I was just thinking that, like, it's I can see it. That's so cool that it actually still has that, so we can see it. You know, just see, kind of almost like seeing inside your head a little bit.
So,
I hadn't even considered also that notion of scratchboard, versus, you know, just kind of straight pen and ink, which I think is uh, it's I like that. You know, I like that idea.
I like the scratch board a lot, and for some reason I don't understand why. When I look, like, at least through Instagram, of people that use scratch board, not many of them use it the way I do. Where essentially I use it like it's a white piece of paper, but then on the darkest darks, I just paint them in black and scratch it back out.
Yeah.
And to me, it helps to give the piece a bold look. Uh, I like it better that way. I guess that's why I do it that way.
Well, and what one of the questions that I would have had for you was, you know, like in this piece right here with the way it's filled in around the leaves, that would have been a question that I would have had is, you know, do you spend that time coloring? But I like doing it the opposite. I think probably also kind of helps you to expedite your process.
Yeah, and it just I think it gives a lot bolder look to the piece.
Yeah.
They have those big blocky darks that then you take the lights back out of. Just gives it a little more interest, I think. And there you can see in the rocks, it's a little more obvious what was black and what wasn't.
Yeah, yeah. And do you, this is again kind of going back to the pen and ink, even though it's digital, do you switch I feel like your consideration of your line thickness, the weight of your line, is important to all of these pieces.
Sure.
Um, would you say you have a lot of different weights that you use?
Oh yeah, for sure. And then when I do the digital work too, it's a pressure sensitive tablet. So
Yeah.
I always work in a pen that has thick and thin to it. So I get some line variations that way.
I'm going to jump over to one of the other pieces that I kind of pulled out intentionally. Um,
Sure.
let's see. Yeah, like I just noticed the weight of the line at the top at your horizon on this piece. I feel like it's just, you know, it's one of those things that I don't think people recognize. Like that because of the weight of that line, it creates that really distinct feel. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. Yeah. I just liked it. Made it a little more graphic to do that rather than trying to make a piece that's photographic, which is not what I'm doing. I'm not trying to be photographic about anything. Um,
And would you do you that those energy lines that you mentioned, were they, I imagine they're through this piece as well. Could you speak to that a little bit, or?
yeah, that piece was a little bit less that way because I was trying to follow the rock forms
Okay.
more. So it has to do. I guess I kind of picked a view a little bit. For reference for this one, I found a bunch of photos with sort of the same sort of view, and then I knew I wanted to have something a little bit more unusual and a little more grand, because the whole piece is 3 times that wide. um, so I went to Google Earth and was able to figure out a view from Google Earth and then use that as my reference, which is the details aren't very accurate and aren't very good for that, but anyway, I use that as the basic reference for that piece. But in picking out a view, I think I did a lot to try and find that flow through the valley in the view itself also.
Yeah.
Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, no, it does. Definitely does. I want to look at one more. You've been so gracious with your time.
Oh, no problem.
Um, I was curious about this piece again, just kind of thinking of along those the reference images and, you know, will you talk a little bit about creating this piece and kind of how you thought about it?
Yeah, I wanted to do an Olympic National Park part. When I lived in Seattle, I went there, a few times. I went to Olympic National Park, and I always liked the part along the water there. To me, that was the more unique part, of, at least of Washington State, because you had mountains all over Washington State. So the mountain part was a little less unique to that specific park. I wanted to try and find a piece that was a little more specific. So, and then the other thing I always just thought was gorgeous in the water around Seattle were the starfish, all those different colored starfish. So I
Yeah.
wanted to fit that in there somehow. And then I wanted to fit in a person so you could kind of relate a little bit with a person. So I have her picking up a shell or kind of whatever you want her to be doing, but examining something and kind of enjoying walking around out there. And wanted to try and get that atmosphere that's out there, that foggy atmosphere that's out there at times too, or quite a bit of times. So worked all that together. In there, you can see the kind of flow through the water too, how that works out.
Yeah.
With all these big color pieces, I also work out a rough color sketch too for myself. So when I get to the final piece, I already have a pretty good idea of how the color is going to be.
Yeah. It's almost,
So
it
so
ends up
yeah,
almost,
like the other ones, I did a black and white drawing of this first. This one's all digital. So I when I do that, I separate like the black and white drawing probably has maybe maybe 15 layers, 10 or 15 layers to it. So different sections are separated out differently. So then I can go back and then I do the coloring underneath the line work, and then I go back and color the line work itself to work well with the whole color scheme, I guess. So it's not just black line on top of a color.
oh, so you'll change the color of your line. Oh, wow.
Yeah, so the line work itself change. If you look up at the rock, if I guess it's not in the same post, but if you looked at the black and white, it kind of doesn't make sense as a black and white piece because those trees back there are big and black, and they're the darkest thing in the whole drawing are those trees back there. But they were never meant to be big and black and bold like that. They were meant to be. I already knew I wanted them to be subtle like that. It was just easier for me to draw it that way.
Wow. Well, I'm going to stop share here.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I know my students will enjoy this, but I just myself have enjoyed it. What a, cool to be able to get a little bit of insight from somebody with your experience. And I mean, your work, I love it.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it. Thanks for reaching out to me. I appreciate it. So,
Yeah.
any of your students want to reach out to me, they're free to do so.
Yeah, that's great. I'll definitely let them know that, and
They
I'll,
can reach me through the website or through Instagram. However they want to do it. Instagram's probably a little easier to do.
cool. All right. I'm going to, well, thanks again.